Welcome to Daily Dose of Aramaic Grammar Learning videos. This is Lesson 4, in which we will be getting into prepositions. Specifically in this part, prepositions governing nouns and pronouns in ways to which we're accustomed from our study of Hebrew. Further details and more in-depth treatment can be found in Biblical Aramaic for Biblical Interpreters, pages 18 to 25. Let's get started. Now, prepositions in the languages of the world are for the purpose of comparison, time, location, manner, means, possession. The main uses we see in Aramaic are comparison, time, and location, so that's what we're going to be focusing on. So speaking of comparison, what do prepositions in Biblical Aramaic do with this sort of function? Well, there's a comparison of item A, for instance, and item B, a comparison that communicates similarity. As in, Ezra 6:18, like what is written in the book of Moses. So we see kaf, as we expect from Hebrew, communicating similarity in a comparative kind of way. Well, in a sort of opposite way, there can be a comparison between two items that communicates difference. And this is the special comparative use of min, that preposition, greater than her companions in Daniel 7:20. This is also similar to what we're familiar with about the min preposition and its uses in Hebrew. Moving on to time. Let me explain this setup first. We see the dotted line near the bottom stretching from past to future with a reference time marked with a large X. We need a reference time because we can discuss other times other than the time that a speaker is experiencing or an author is writing in. So when we're talking about time, it's in reference to some reference time that we know from context. Okay? And these are the time use of some of these prepositions, which we've already seen can have other uses. So first, let's start with the bait preposition as regards its use with time. In the first year of Cyrus the king, Ezra 6:3. And we might forget that this is a time use because our English language uses in both for time and for location. So, in a linguistic accident, because Biblical Aramaic bait preposition does something similar, has a time reference and a location reference that we can gloss similarly, we might forget the actual function. So the time function is at some time, and it's not placed with any particular meaning with regard to that reference time. It might as well have been in the upper right, just at some time. That is then going to be pointed out in the expression. Next, as soon as with a kaf. Now this is what I mean about multiple uses. We've already seen kaf in a comparative use, right? Where it was comparing item A and item B and communicating similarity. Well, as soon as is also a similar use as in Biblical Hebrew. This would be used with an infinitive, and when he came near to the den. And this means as soon as this happened. Now, admittedly, there is only one of these time expressions in Biblical Aramaic, but there are enough in Biblical Hebrew, and we believe the similarities are significant enough to be able to make the judgment call of exactly what time are we talking about, sort of in an immediate time sense, as soon as. And there is an intentionality behind the placement of the down-pointing arrow in this diagram to be slightly to the right of the time that is marked with the X on the dotted line. And that has to do with it's not exactly at the reference time, but something has happened, and then another thing happens immediately following. That's the idea. Next, after. So this is placed at some point after the reference time, as you can see. What will be after this? Daniel 2:45. since. Okay, remember from being used for a comparison that communicates difference. Well, here's the idea of from in a way where it's from a reference time until now would mean, well, since. So in Ezra 4:15, since ancient days makes sense. So looking back to some reference time, and it's the time since then. And then somewhat of an opposite idea, until. So, or by the third day of the month of Adar. So the third day of the month of Adar in this case would be that reference time. And the by idea is charting out some time before that reference time. Ezra 6:15. So this was a very quick tour through the time-related use of some prepositions. Well, what about location? Well, we're going to see a different use of the min preposition here, right? Because now we're talking about location, not time. So even our line is different in this diagram. It's not a dotted line from the past leading inexorably towards a future in a left to right kind of fashion, but here we have that which is behind, which I'm charting out as being on the left, from a certain reference point all the way to what is in front of that reference point to the right. So this is position now, not time, location. So let's start with above. So this is above that X point. He was walking on, and so this is, in context, he's walking on the roof, I suppose, of the royal palace of Babylon. This is Nebuchadnezzar before he goes mad. Daniel 4:26. Neged, toward. Windows in his upper room opened toward Jerusalem. So there's this idea of the windows are sort of in a way behind Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the reference point, and there's sort of a pointing towards that city. Next, as far as this odd idea, and it came to the Ancient of Days. So there was an origin point, and the destination is at the reference point. So I suppose we could chart the beginning point of that travel somewhere else other than to the left of the reference point, because it doesn't necessarily have to be behind. But I'm not wanting to clutter this diagram by doing some sort of, it could be from anywhere and drawing multiple lines. So this is somewhat of a to idea with an idea of stopping at the reference point. Now here's something that is definitely much more positional, the before idea. It was read before Rehum, so this reading act is taking place before him, in front of his face, basically. Next, from. Maybe this is the sense of the min preposition with which we're most familiar from our Hebrew studies, and it certainly applies in Aramaic. The God who will deliver you from my hands. So there's an out of my hands, perhaps, idea, but there's a starting point in the hands. So coming out of the hands, right? Next, to. Daniel went to his house. So somewhat like the ad word, as far as it's not absolutely necessary that Daniel has started out from a position sort of arbitrarily behind his house, but again, the point here is the destination is the reference point. Whereas with from, that was the starting point of the journey, or in this case, journey out of the hands, if you remember. But in this case, the lamed preposition is saying the destination is that reference point. So to his house. The house is the reference point in this case in Daniel 2:17. Next, lavat. Now this is an idea that really is not present in the same way as English, so it's difficult to render in a gloss-like fashion other than to say at. And this is directed right at that reference point. They came up from your place to us. But see, I'm struggling here with translation because there's no noun that says your place, right? So where you are is my attempt to preserve the sort of prepositional idea here. So again, this is not really an idea we have in English. Some attempts to explain this have used the French word chez, so C-H-E-Z. So if that means something to you, all the better. And then lastly, under, from under the heavens. And of course, there's a from in there as well, but the idea here is being under the reference point, which in this case, in Jeremiah 10:11, is the heavens. And there are some more location-oriented prepositions that I thought would clutter that diagram, so here we go. Let's look at the X. So the idea here is item A and item B are sort of with each other. They're together, okay? And the light dwells with him. So the light and him together is the idea I'm trying to depict with the drawing, especially the X location marker. This is, of course, very similar to the biblical Hebrew use of im. Next, in. Now, we've seen bait used in other ways already, but this is a locational use of being inside something, right? So, in the province of Media. Good, like Hebrew. And then between, bane. Bane only appears twice in the biblical Aramaic corpus, and we don't have an example in biblical Aramaic of between A and between B, like we see in Hebrew. Between its or her teeth is in Daniel 7:5, where it's marking out that space between items, which we expect from having studied Hebrew. Well, next we're going to look at some other uses of prepositions other than this. So I hope this graphical display of the different uses somewhat disambiguated some of the uses by categorizing them as comparison, time, and location, and also helped us to see that prepositions can have more than one meaning, and the meaning is not dependent on English glosses. I look forward to part 2 of Lesson 4 with you.